In 1517, the Reformation began as a German monk named Martin Luther protested against indulgences by posting a document called 95 Theses on the Catholic Church doors and by sending it in the form of a letter to the Archbishop. Pope Leo X got angry but attempted to give him a second chance to understand his mistake. Luther refused and spread his belief. A man named Johann Tetzel helped Martin Luther translate and spread 95 Theses in pamphlets using new printing technology from Johannes Gutenberg, since the original was in Latin. Many began to agree with Luther, and they moved north to break themselves from the church. This started a Protestant religion. During this time, Henry VIII and Pope Clement did not get along well. Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon, and they stayed married for 24 years. The Pope then approved their divorce. Henry continued to marry another wife, which the Pope turned down approval for divorce. As the Protestants moved north, he decided to move with them. Although Henry wasn't a Protestant, he left with them to break from the church. When he arrived, he established the Church of England and married Anne Boleyn. In 1507, Henry VIII's father, Henry VII, had been granted the title of Protector and Defender of the Christian Faith. This was one of the reasons that Henry VIII granted his Latin title, Fide Defensor, which translates to Defender of the Faith. Whenever Henry broke from Rome and moved north to establish the Church of England, Pope Paul III took away his known title because it was an attack on the faith. Something else he decided to do was marry his brother's widow. His brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, was married to a woman known as Catherine of Aragon. When Arthur died from illness, Henry decided that he should marry Catherine because of her Spanish origins. Whenever they divorced, Henry decided to make a law that you could not marry your brother's widow. Martin Luther was a monk from Germany. Whenever he came to the church, he had learned about indulgences. Indulgences were slips of paper that was believed to help people shorten their time in purgatory and possibly raise their chances to go to heaven. Even though it may sound ridiculous to you, it certainly did not to them. People actually had so much hope in them that they would spend their food savings just to buy an indulgence. Luther was puzzled at why people actually believed such a cruel thing. Soon after, he wrote a document called 95 Theses to protest against the use of indulgences. He also sent it as a letter to the Archbishop Albert of Brandenburg. A quote from Martin Luther reads, "For who in fact seeks the salvation of souls through indulgences, and not instead money for his coffers? This is evident from the way indulgences are preached." He said this quote after indulgences. Here is a timeline of the Reformation. When Henry VIII was still in Rome, Thomas Cranmer was the one who gave the omen to have Henry and Catherine get married. He was also one of the leaders in the Reformation. He helped Henry VIII establish the Church of England as well. Even though he didn't make any change, he was still good assistance to Henry. Thomas Wolsey was the Archbishop at the Catholic Church. He had been stripped of his government titles because he didn't negotiate an annulment for Henry and Catherine's marriage. This was actually the reason that they decided to go to Cranmer to get married. Like what was said in the beginning, after 24 years of marriage, Henry VIII decided that he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon. Even though divorcing was against Catholic law, Pope Leo X decided to let it slide. He accepted their divorce. After that, Henry met a lovely lady known as Anne Boleyn. It did not take him too long to decide that he wanted to have her hand in marriage. He had decided to move north with Martin Luther and the Protestants to establish a new church. When it was made, he declared himself as head of the church and married Anne. Earlier, I mentioned that Henry VIII wanted to marry his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, because of her Spanish origins. Even though they were married for 24 years, there was just this one thing that made Henry want to move on: the Tudor monarchy. Henry's father, Henry VII, started the monarchy. Henry and his brother Arthur had the job of carrying on as monarchs. They needed to keep the monarchy going. Even though it was not true, Henry believed that the monarch should be carried with a man. When Catherine gave birth to a girl, he was so determined to continue the monarch that he divorced her to find a new wife to give him a boy. Whenever Henry VIII decided to break from Rome, he fled north with Martin Luther and the Protestants, even though he didn't necessarily agree with the reason they wanted to leave. When they arrived, Henry made the decision to found the Church of England. He founded this church and declared himself as the head so he could make the choice to marry and divorce whenever he felt like it, and he did. In fact, his wife Anne Boleyn supposedly committed adultery. He made the decision to execute her instead of divorce. He really had a large amount of power in the church. Even though Henry's decisions affected many people, including Rome, many things that happened caused a great amount of influence on not only Rome, but our society to this day. One thing is that the Reformation caused many changes in the Catholic Church, one thing being our holy sacraments. In fact, we actually only ended up using 5 out of 7 of the sacraments. Another thing that Henry VIII happened to do was help to establish a new religion called Anglican. When he established the Church of England, this is when the religion kicked in. This religion meant that people believed in one God that has 3 main elements: God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Lastly, there is still a belief in the Catholic Church that if you divorce, you will go to hell. Even though a lot of people in the church don't believe it to this day, there are still some people who think that this is true. Because Henry VIII has created many new things for our society, he is the reason that we happen to have many conflicts and compromises in our history. Even though Henry VIII made divorces when he wasn't allowed to, and left Rome in protest, in some ways his actions were not as bad as people thought. Even though he made illegal choices in the church, he is one of the reasons the English Reformation continued. For example, the printing press was made during this time. It was how Martin Luther was able to spread his beliefs on indulgences through pamphlets. Without his ideas being spread, Luther wouldn't have been able to move Protestants north. So, without Henry VIII, none of this would have in fact happened. To begin wrapping everything up, Henry VIII made very poor decisions, but he and the Reformation have given us things that we use to this day. Even though it has caused many conflicts, like people separating from the Catholic Church, it has caused some compromises such as a new church religion. To set everything aside altogether, Henry was supposed to defend the sacramental nature of marriage, but because of his divorces, it caused many people to wonder if he should really be known as the defender of the faith.